Hey guys, welcome to Thrive Bites, the official podcast of Dr. Colin Zhu, aka the Chef Doc. On every episode, I talk with health and wellness experts from all over the world, such as doctors, chefs, dietitians, coaches, and many more. And I sit down with them and have casual conversations about plant-based lifestyle, how to elevate our emotional resilience, and what it really means to thrive. And I bring all of this to you. So let's get to this week's episode. Okay, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites. I'm your host, Colin Zhu, and thank you for listening on. Today, I have a wonderful guest with us today. His name is Ron Pratt. Say hi to everyone, Ron.
Hi, everyone.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I am, very excited to have him on. For those of you who do not know who he is a licensed acupuncturist from out of New York State, and he has a very, very full breadth and depth of traditional Chinese medicine, including acupuncture, moxibustion, gui sha, Chinese herbal medicine, and he also does nutritional counseling. And he treats a full range of conditions, and we're very excited to have him on the show. Thanks, Ron, for coming in. Where are you calling from right now?
I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I have family in New York right now. So, definitely very interesting times, being, our current space right now. But yeah, I am very excited. So to start off, I love hearing about people's stories. And that's a centerpiece of the podcast, is really understanding where the guest comes from, their background, their story, how they came to be and do what they love at this very moment. So can you let's start off by saying, give us a little bit of snapshot of your story of how you came from A to B. I understand, off of your website, you used to work as a corporate trader, and then, you ventured out into traditional Chinese medicine. And to me, that's kind of almost like a big 180, so to speak. So walk us through that.
Yeah, I think, I get that a lot. People are like, how'd you go from that to this? And, for me, it was really a bit of a journey. There wasn't necessarily a pivotal moment where I was like, aha, I'm going to go study Chinese medicine. It was more of a long-term process. And so I'll highlight a few moments in time that sort of were critical in terms of changing my trajectory. And the first big one, I was actually working as a corporate trainer on Wall Street. And while I love the part of my job that was about empowering people to do well at the work that they love, I didn't really feel connected at all to the industry I was working in. And I really had this dissatisfaction. I would go to work every day, and maybe not every day, but a lot of days I would go to work and I was just unmotivated, and I often felt a bit like a fraud. And I would find myself working late just to kind of play catch up on work. And at that time, I was just like, you know what? I don't have kids. I'm not responsible for somebody else. I should be able to go to work every day and love what I do. And I remember talking to some of my friends, and one of my friends said to me, work is just a transaction. And, like she said, I go to work and people give me money, and that's all it is. And somebody else said to me, work is the thing that I do so I can do other things that I love. And I just said, that doesn't work for me either. I wanted to go to work every day and do work that I love. And so I did a lot of soul searching, and I decided, I was pretty committed to wellness at that point, and I was pretty passionate about it because of my own experience. And so I just decided, I'm going to keep being a trainer, but I'm going to break into the wellness sector and I'm going to leave Wall Street. And so I wrote out this 5-year plan. I said, I'm going to be a director of training at a wellness-based company in 5 years. And so I gradually started that transition. And within 3 years, I was director of training at a wellness company. And I did that for about 15 years. And I reached a point, as a trainer, I really loved my work. But as I started to be responsible for bigger departments and, had bigger, more global responsibility, I found myself with that same level of dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. And that was a struggle for me. And I was like, I sort of went back to that same value I had about I want to enjoy my work. I want to contribute to the lives of others, and I'm not doing it here. And, working in wellness, the one thing that became really clear to me was that I wanted to be on the practitioner side of wellness, and I no longer wanted to be on the corporate side. And so I did, again, a lot of soul searching, and I specifically chose to study acupuncture because it was a form of medicine where I felt like I could integrate my background about empowering people to in all aspects of their life, and also bring in my interest in wellness. And so I could really work at the level of body, mind, and emotions. And so that sort of was the beginning of my journey to study acupuncture.
I'm sure anyone that's listening, at first glance, when they hear about it, they, they're like, how do you go from A to B? And then when you break it down like that, you could see how, during that time, how your thought processes were, bringing you from different, I don't want to say roadblocks, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just different, different detours, so to speak, in terms of, this is not really sitting right with me. This doesn't feel right at this point in time. And you tend to pivot, you tend to change direction. And I think that's important for someone to do, to take that self-reflection and just pause and, just pivot.
Yeah, I think my probably the biggest lesson I got out of my journey was we can't think our way through things. We have to go out and experience it. And in that experience, we get more information, and then we can reapply that to the next step. I can think of, being in high school and sitting down with guidance counselors and, being told, you're good in math and science. What do you want to do? It should be something in engineering I think that's such an unfair question to ask somebody in terms of like cognating your way into the way that you want to spend the rest of your life, as opposed to what do you enjoy? What lights you up? What gets you excited? Go spend more time doing that, and then come back to me and let's talk further. It's just a different approach, but it's the one that works for me.
Yeah. And I definitely love the work of guidance counselors. But, if you think about it, we all go through school for, those of us have been privileged to go through school. And, I think school teaches you a set of ways to think versus, things that, you probably have been carrying, and I'm talking about like your hopes and dreams and things like that. Whereas an educational system, in my point of view, and having studied a lot in terms of personal development, is that this educational system is meant to kind of groom you to kind of get a job, right? To be in that default mode of, going through the 8 to 5 and things like that, and not really harnessing like your dreams, so to speak. And there's some, people in the middle, whether you're lucky enough to have good teachers, professors, mentors, or people outside of school, whether it's like a family member or a friend, to kind of give you a different set of perspectives. And sometimes you don't have that, you have to go through your own experience to be able to pivot, differently. So I'm glad that you've had that experience, or else you wouldn't be doing what you love right now. So I think that's great.
Yeah, so true. I think that we are just creatures of lifelong learning, and I think part of our journey on the planet is trying to figure out like, how do we work and how do we
Mm-hmm.
grow? And, I think my work and my practice now is so much about how do I help other people do that same work?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So relating it to where you are now in terms of, acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, was there anything maybe from your own personal health journey or someone else's health journey that kind of contributed to that pathway as well?
Yeah, I mentioned when I was telling you my story about switching to wellness that I already, at that point in my life, had a strong interest. And part of that was when I was in college, I was a sophomore in college to be precise. I developed a lot of digestive trouble. And I went to see my GP. And I remember at the time being really scared. I did not understand what was happening in my body.
Mm.
And this is despite having two nurses for parents. And I remember telling him what was going on. And I was at a point where I welled up. I almost broke into tears in his office
Mm.
because I just didn't understand what was happening.
Mm.
And he wrote me this script and sent me on my way. And I didn't leave that office with any more information about what was happening with my body, why were things not going well. And so I was still scared. I took the meds and it didn't change anything. And I remember I was actually not getting any healthier. And I remember like it was my spring semester, sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
And I called my mom and I said, I'm not taking these meds anymore. They're not helping. And it was my finals week. And my mother said to me, do you think this is a great idea to stop doing this in the middle of your finals week? I said, yes, I'm confident this is what I should be doing. And so I actually started seeing a holistic chiropractor over that summer.
Mm.
And she really listened to me first and foremost. I felt like for the first time, somebody heard what I had to say. And, she gave me things to work on. She gave me, some specific dietary changes, some specific lifestyle changes. By the time I went back to school and started my junior year, I really was at a point where things were not perfect, but they were much better. I could manage things and I was no longer scared that something serious was wrong. But I also know, so she also sort of planted this seed and she said, so this is the early 90s, by the way. So she
Mm-hmm.
planted this seed and she said, you might have a sensitivity to gluten. And when you're ready, we can talk about it more. And I said, well, what would that involve? And she said, probably the best way to figure this out would be to have you do an elimination diet. And I said, oh, and what if I have an allergy to gluten or sensitivity? So she told me, I would just need to stop eating wheat and some other grains. And I remember thinking, well, that's not going to happen right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I continued to see her. And what I loved about working with her is that she really let me go at my own pace. And when I graduated college, I went to her and I said, okay, I'm ready. Let's talk about what I need to do. And I did the elimination diet and it was really clear. I was sensitive to gluten and dairy. And so I cut those things out of my life. And so what I loved about working with her is one, she really listened to me, but two, she really met me where I was at and said, she could have been steadfast with me. You know what? I think this is a gluten problem and you need to take this on right now. And as a sophomore in college, I probably would have failed miserably at that. So she just kind of supported me and said, when you're ready, let's talk.
Yeah, I think that's I have similar where I also had a family chiropractor growing up, and I didn't go. It was more for just wellness, and I remember them embodying like the type of caretaker I wanted to be. He was charming, he was witty, he was super funny, he sang and, in the office. And I just, really, really was enthralled with the type of care he was giving. And so and he listened, and so I think that's what's important is that one of the best practices to medicine, no matter what type of form of it is really understanding the person at the end of the day. I practice, osteopathic medicine, which, our foundations is really looking people at, the whole and really understanding the person behind the disease and the symptoms. And so, I can definitely relate in terms of, it is important to listen. It is important to hear and understand where that person is coming through, because 9 times out of 10, they're already telling you what's wrong. If you don't listen, if you don't keep those ears going, then you won't be able to pick it up. And I don't know in terms from a provider, but in terms of a general audience, in terms of like where our society is, in terms of modern day, society, definitely compared to the 90s, I believe we're way more distracted. And so that gives us, it gives us more obstacles in a way. It gives us more roadblocks in terms of listening to bridging that gap. So, and I'm like you, if I mentor someone, whether it's like a medical student or someone, similar, it's really about understanding people's stories. So, I'm glad that you had that first kind of, practitioner to be able to kind of open that gateway for you.
Yeah, she changed my life. She really did.
Did you call them up and be like, hey, this is where I'm at now because of you?
I grew up in Boston, and so, she and I chat occasionally on Facebook, and, I don't get back there very often. My parents actually no longer live in Massachusetts. And so, but if I do go back there, she is somebody that I totally make time to see. She's wonderful.
Hey guys, we're going to be taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thrive Bites. Let's get back to the interview. Great. So let's shift gears a little bit. So traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture and all of its subsequent, modalities that fall under that umbrella have been in practice for, as thousands of years. And their way of looking at the person and way of looking at the body as a whole is very different than Western, medicine, and I know this having grown up with a mother that practices traditional Chinese medicine to close to 4 decades now. And so I want you to share with the audience, what is, you talk about this a lot on your, website about, the relationship with stress and dis-ease, dis-ease with the hyphen in between. And what does that mean, from a Chinese medicine perspective? And, what is that? How would you define that? And why is that important?
So I use the term dis-ease because, when you think about pain, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, it all stems from this place of imbalance. And so, in the classics, they say, when the human body enjoys health when there's a balanced lifestyle, and it succumbs to disease when there's not. And so the reason why I use that term dis-ease is because I actually want people to ask me this question, like, why is it dis-ease and not disease? Because to me, dis-ease really kind of implies that, like, okay, there's something out of balance, and therefore the body can't do what it knows to do. And so then, I tend to think of the dis-ease as messaging in the same way that, like, if you're hanging out with a friend and you do something that irritates them, they might say, hey, don't do that, and so there's this momentary eruption of a little bit of energy to say, hey, like, this isn't working for me. And so sometimes, we look at the body often in terms of like, when it comes to symptomology, in terms of it being broken or in terms of it not working properly. And I actually really like to think about it more in terms of, I use a lot of car analogies. I'm kind of a car guy, but I tell people, start to think about your symptoms like dashboard lights. And so when you start to see a flare up in symptoms, take a step back and say, all right, where is there not balance? Where am I not, paying attention to things right now? Because often, if we can embrace the symptomology as simply, the body saying, hey, I'm not getting what I need. And then we can provide that. And we get communication back from the body that says, yeah, I feel better. Then we learn how to walk that line of balance. And there's another in Buddhism, they talk about like the midline or the middle road. And, it's this line between self-indulgence and self-mortification where there's this balance of health and this balance of living where people thrive.
Yeah, I think like nature and Mother Nature, and if you have gone through a science course, a lot of things are talking about from a scientific perspective or a biological perspective, homeostasis. And when we talk about balance, that's very similar to what we're talking about. The body, in its infinite complex genius, it's able to figure out how to balance itself. And I think along with what you're saying, when you do things enough, whether it's eating a poor diet or living, a very risky or precarious lifestyle, and et cetera, it adds to that balance or imbalance. And, from that imbalance, it just manifests as different, diseases. Do you, in terms of, walk us through like a typical client or patient intake? Do you also go through like a questionnaire, but also in terms of looking at, the patient's facial constitution, tongue, pulse diagnosis? How do you kind of intake a patient that's interested in seeing you?
You probably know because your mom is a practitioner in the world of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. We have different lineages. And so I'm very much a classical guy, and the interview is really important to me. And so my first appointment with a patient, I spend 2 hours with them. And so we do a really comprehensive history. And, in Chinese medicine, we talk about that being the 10 questions, but it's really a thorough review of systems. It's a review of history, like all the way back to childhood. And then I also then do some of the traditional diagnostics like tongue and pulse. And I do some important ones too, range of motion. So if people are coming in for pain, I want to see, how do they walk across the room? But I also want to know things like, so for instance, I want to know, what's it like for somebody with back pain to get in and out of their car, or to somebody with sciatica to sit in a chair? Because those are ultimately the things that they're going to notice in their life. And so one of the other big things I want to know is, where are people stopped in their life? And, because that's often the thing that brings them in. Like I worked with a woman recently who had really significant sciatic pain, and she'd been dealing with this sciatic pain for a long time. And, we went through this history, and this is part of the reason why I spend time doing the history and don't just give somebody the form and say, fill this out and we'll start. We went through this history, and over that time, we were developing rapport. And there was this moment where she broke into tears and she said, I just want to be able to have dinner sitting at the dining room table with my husband. I'm tired of having to stand at the kitchen counter because I can't sit down.
Mm.
That was the thing that she was ultimately going to measure the success of treatment by. And that was the thing that brought her in.
Mm.
And you don't know, it's different for everybody, but that's ultimately what I want to know. Where is in your life that you're stopped? Where is it that you are no longer finding the joy that's really important to you? Because that's ultimately what we need to bring back into your life in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like, for you do car analogies. I like to use, navigational analogies. So, when I have someone come in and, you talk about diet and lifestyle and, the whole gamut, of lifestyle related, perspectives in terms of counseling, my biggest thing is, what makes them, and, what is their kind of directional compass, where are they going in life? And, I tell them, hey, you could eat the best diet, you could live the best lifestyle, but if you don't really understand the why behind you and why, you are quote unquote suffering today, we don't have a clear direction of how we want to take it. You know what I'm saying? So, and I think that's similar to your patient's account, is where they understand why. They just want to, for some people, they just want to get up and get to the next day. For others, it's more of a deeper existential, pull for them to keep going or to get to the next step or get to the next level. So I think that's very super important. And, I could see how a 2-hour history intake could be adequate in terms of getting that, because it's hard, especially for me practicing primary care, it's hard given the time parameters and restraints to be able to extract that from a visit.
Yeah, I think it's one of the greatest luxuries I have, is that I have the ability to do that. And, it's interesting because sometimes people, when I tell them on the phone, this is what we're going to do, and it's 2 hours in terms of history, diagnostics, and treatment. And, some of the people that give me the most pushback will then say to me, wow, this has been really helpful. And so it's interesting, but, you mentioned that we have so many distractions. We have so many, we live in a fast-paced world. We're thrown messages all day long. But we tend to pay a lot more attention to the external messages.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we're not paying any attention to the internal messages. And that time where we take the history for some people is as much about me connecting with their story as it is with them getting reconnected with the things that are important to them and the things that aren't working.
Definitely. Because, as we know, especially in Chinese medicine, especially, for us as osteopaths, the mental, emotional, and physical, they're all interconnected. So sometimes a certain high level of stress could be just enough to manifest, just physical symptoms and not have not a clear, obvious direct, correlation. So it's important. And I'm glad that you have that luxury. I wish I had that, in terms of the regular primary world. So shifting gears a little bit in terms of where you're at now, in terms of how you're practicing, how do you feel that it fits within our modern healthcare, given, what we know about, modern healthcare and its limitations. We're very good in terms of technologies, breaking out, new advances in maybe cancer treatments and in, procedures, surgeries, we're doing robotics now, but there's a lot of limitations in terms of, people are not getting good enough prevention or education or just basics in terms of just lifestyle. Doctors aren't trained. I talk a lot about this on my previous episodes, is where medical students are not given enough training, and so on and so forth. So how does TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, fit into modern healthcare right now?
I love the way that you frame the question, specifically because I know both in among TCM practitioners as well as among um, Western medical practitioners, for lack of a better description right now, we see a lot of framing as either or. And I think that that dichotomy that we create is really limiting, because I think that we both bring a lot to the table. And I think it's also really hard for the patient when, even in China, people are, they go to the hospital and they can choose the traditional wing or the modern wing. And we have the same thing in a slightly different format in the US. So where do I think Chinese medicine and traditional medicine in general can add value? I think in the, lifestyle medicine is this growing branch of medicine. And when you look at the classic texts, some of the first chapters are all just lifestyle medicine. And I recently was listening to a medical doctor speak, and he said that 78% of all chronic illness is caused or exacerbated by lifestyle problems. And so I think Chinese medicine has its greatest contribution in helping people really live healthier lifestyles so that ultimately we don't get sick. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how we use it, but I think that's where the greatest potential is. There's so many Chinese proverbs that are things like, waiting to dig a well, waiting until you're thirsty to dig a well is the equivalent of going to see a doctor when you're sick. And, as you said, like there's so much we can do in the realm of education. But I also think sometimes, just like in my story, like I didn't understand what was happening with my body, and there was no one that could talk to me about that, or there was no one that was making the time to. And so helping people really understand the wisdom of their body and how to use that information. I wholeheartedly agree with you that often patients know where they need to start to focus on. We need to give them permission to listen to that. And some of that comes from helping them really cultivate that wisdom and that sense of like, yes, I can trust my body. I can trust that this information I'm getting from my body isn't helpful.
Do you feel that, and I like that, by the way, giving permission, because, I didn't really think of it like that. So that's very interesting for you to say that. But is it as much as giving permission as it is in terms of how people are conditioned or oriented to kind of think, to, especially in an American society and Western medicine society where, you just rely on the symptoms, right? So, and we are so ingrained in the symptoms being a certain type of medical language that a physician can only decipher. So when you talk about that, the body cues and people understanding to learn about themselves better, do you offer them or teach them or help educate them in terms of how to do that better, in terms of listening and honing in on those signals?
Absolutely. I mean, when I start working with a patient, we talk about 4 lifestyle medicine pillars. And then I have them go and track around those. And so then, I have them track things like, what does their water intake look like? What does their nutrition look like? How much are they moving? How is their sleep? And we do that for a week. And then we go back and we really look at those 4 pillars. But really, what I'm doing is I'm teaching people to start to really pay attention to what's the messaging from their body. And everybody is at a different place on that spectrum. I always get questions like, what's the right diet? How much sleep is enough? How much water is enough? And I always sort of answer it in the same way, which is what is your body telling you? So are you, with sleep, for instance, are you waking rested? With water, what are you noticing as you increase the amount of water? Are you noticing a decrease in symptomology? And, with nutrition, how is your energy level? And so when I ask those questions, I'm slowly introducing them to the things to look for in their own health. The other thing so I track for I have patients track, and I don't believe that people should track 365 days a year, but I do think there's an incredible value in tracking.
Mm.
I heard recently that human beings, about 50% of what they remember is accurate. So, I'm no better than anyone else in this regard. Just last month, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm waking really groggy, and I was like, I don't know if it's the stress of the pandemic or what, but I'm a pretty active person. I cycle, I hike, and I do yoga, and so I wasn't doing as much activity as normal, and so I'm like, I don't know why I'm tired. So I started tracking my sleep, and I was like, this is why I'm tired. I know my optimum level of sleep is about 7.5 hours, and I was sleeping only 6.5. But I was telling myself a different story. And so the value of tracking is it creates transparency. Because we're optimistic as human beings, and as a result of that, sometimes we tell ourselves a slightly different story.
Hey guys, we're going to be taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thrive Bites. Let's get back to the interview. I think it's important to have those reminders and those reinforcements in terms of, our bodies is a very complex machinery, but it's very, very intuitive. And I think it's reminding ourselves, and it goes back to my point about modern society, is that, now we're just way bombarded and overly distracted. And that kind of takes away from really trusting, yourself in a way, and trusting your body cues. So it's, it's super important to kind of remind ourselves and reinforce that. So I would love to ask this question in terms of, when people come to you, what are the biggest misconceptions that they have about their health, that you've kind of observed over time from your background's perspective?
One thing that patients will often say things to me like, I was broken, you fixed me. And I'm always like, no, you're not broken. Another one, patients will talk pretty negatively about yourself, and I'll say things like, you're not allowed to talk about my patient that way. So I think a lot of the misconceptions are that I'm broken and I can't heal. I need to rely on something external to create that healing. I think a lot of people have a misconception of what it means to thrive. Even I recently had my annual physical. I said something, I don't remember what it was, but my general practitioner said, oh, welcome, I'm in my late 40s. So he said, welcome to your late 40s. And I was like, no, I'm not going to accept that. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was sort of just, he might have said, oh, how are you doing? And I said, oh, I could probably use a little bit more energy. Other than that, I'm fine. But I also knew at that moment in time, I wasn't cycling as much as I normally do. And I wasn't doing some of the things that I normally do that help me have more energy. But it was interesting. I think this idea that as we get older, illness sets in some capacity, and everything gets worse. I don't want to buy into that, and I'm a big fan of the blue zones research. And,
Mm-hmm.
recently I was reading the story about the guy who's 104 and still chopping his own wood.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the story I
Amazing.
want to buy into. And that's the story I want my patients to buy into. But I think, if I were to sort of pull back and really look at like the things that patients will often tell me, it's this idea that I'm broken, I have to accept this, I have to figure out how to get by with this. And yeah, there are certain times that that's the case, but then there are other times that I think that the human body has an amazing ability to heal if we give it what it needs to do that.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of the blue zones itself, and I think what you're saying about the 104 is really about you would rather buy or subscribe to the notion that our bodies have a unlimited potential. It's not really limited by what modern society teaches us or conditions us to think that by the time you reach your retirement age and that's it, collect a pension, blah blah blah. And I see this in a lot, sometimes in my family members as well, in terms of how they would think. And I think the mindset is a very powerful, you have to lead with that for everything in life. And without a really strong foundation, it's not really going to carry you through. And I teach people, I also use a car analogy as well, is, if you think of your body as the car and your mind as the driver, it's like, well, if you don't have a strong mind, like a strong driver, the car's not going anywhere. You know what I'm saying? So it's very important to teach that kind of mindset, and it gives a lot of people different options, or at least a different perspective of looking at things. So
I think another important piece to layer in with this too is, so I will often say to patients, I'm an optimizer, not a hacker. And what I mean by that is when true healing happens, it happens in incremental stages. And, it's not this quick fix approach.
mm-hmm.
And, I will often, tell people, sleep is the best example of this. Like when we make subtle changes with our sleep, it's not like we wake up the next day and we're suddenly feeling like, wow, that changed my life. But what I notice with sleep is, I make subtle changes with my sleep, and, gradually I wake up a little bit more energetic each day. And suddenly I'm like, wow, I am waking up every day with a level of vibrancy I haven't experienced in a while. And I think it's important to have that conversation, because I think, and I once had a patient say to me, related to the fact that I stopped eating gluten, like, well, you just stopped cold turkey. And I was like, no, I didn't. And,
Right.
I had to explain my story. Like, it was incremental changes that got me here. And I often, have you read James Clear at all, Atomic Habits?
Oh, I've heard of that. That's on my list.
It's a great book, but he tells a story that I use a lot. I was familiar with the story before I read the book, but since I've read the book, I sometimes just direct people there. So the British cycling team, 1 degree of change. Are you familiar with the story?
But you should definitely share.
So in 2003, the British cycling team had never, ever won a Tour de France. And I think at that point they had maybe won like one Olympic gold or something. They had had pretty dismal success in terms of winning. And so they hired Sir Richard Brailsford, who actually was kind of a business guy, but he also was an amateur cyclist. And they hired him to be their performance director. And, his assessment of the team was that they weren't necessarily bad, but they lacked an edge. And so what he implemented with the team was, we are going to look at everything from lifestyle to mechanics to training, and anything that improves our output and our performance by as much as 1%, we're going to adopt that. And so that was 2003. So in 2008, they dominated the Olympics. I think they took 60% of the golds. And in 2012, they broke a number of records. I think it might have been 9. And they won the Tour de France that year. And then they won it in 2013, 2015, 16, and 17. So in 6 years, they won 5 Tour de France's. And I share that story because I think it's a really good analogy for what happens with health. It's not about like, I'm going to feel amazing tomorrow. It's great when that happens, but it's often more about this gradual transition. And this is also why sometimes I feel like tracking is important, because we can look back and say, oh, that's where I was a year ago. And here's where I am today. And as opposed to yesterday, I felt this way. And today I feel this way. So I use that story a lot just to highlight the long-term gain. You wouldn't believe how many times when I've been teaching a webinar or something where people say, like, it's so hard to sell the long-term. You need to sell the short-term instant gratification.
Yeah.
And I get that. It's the way our society is. It's the way our culture is. But, I actually think we need to have more conversations about what the British cycling team is doing. It wasn't. So 2003, they started this. 2008, they had a monumental year. That's 5 years.
Yeah.
We need that kind of patience.
Yeah, definitely. And you can't really teach that. It's really, you have to possess it or learn to adopt it, or it just kind of falls off by the wayside. So but yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'll definitely Atomic Habits is definitely on my list. So so this has been great. I love to close out, and one of my favorite questions to ask my guests is 2-part question. First part is, how do you personally thrive? We talked a lot about, your work, how you came to be, and what you're doing right now. But I think getting to the core of why someone gets up in the morning, what pushes them forward, what lights their fire, is really important to highlight, and also to share with, our audience members. And then the second part of the question is, what are 3 tips that you could get people right now that are listening to improve their health from a Chinese medical perspective?
I'm kind of going to answer this together because they're kind of related for me. Like, in terms of thriving, I absolutely believe we need to, well, for me personally, I need to be living out my purpose every day. I want to live a passion-filled life. I want to go to work every day and love what I do. And I do that in my work. I believe in the power of educating people about how to live healthier lives. And that is incredibly rewarding for me. And then I also, in terms of how I thrive, physically has a lot to do with some of the same tips. So I'll share them. The first one is, I think human beings are meant to be, we're connected beings. We're meant to connect with our community. And we're also meant to be connected with nature. So, what does that look like? So that people say connect with nature all the time. And I live in New York City. So what does that really look like if I live in New York City? So connecting with nature sometimes is as simple as, eating whole food nutrition that's sort of native to your climate. What does nature give you in your climate, and what are those plants, and how do you access them in their wholest form? And also, I live on Prospect Park. Even though I live in New York City, I am in nature at least twice a day, and that really grounds me. It connects me every morning. I walk my dog, and it's a meditational experience for me. Like, I don't take my phone. I literally focus on, what am I feeling with my senses? And we know from research, particularly research that they've done in Japan, that time in nature really helps to dampen stress and anxiety, but it also really helps to reset us. And I think that's a critical part of, for me, how I can thrive in New York City, is the connection I have with food and nature. I also think one other way to connect with nature is to really observe that, we as humans are not separate from nature, and we're not separate from the clock cycles. So, there's an ideal time for us to wind down, and there's an ideal time for us to get up. And our cortisol and melatonin cycles match up with the sun, and there's a reason for that. And so I try to stay as connected to that as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So another one for me is movement. And movement, not only is it good at keeping me healthy, but it also is really wonderful for me when I get stuck. So I mentioned earlier, I cycle, I practice yoga, I hike. I tell people, when it comes to movement, when it comes to physical activity, find things that you love, find things that excite you. I worked with this one patient, and she was a Division I college athlete, and she graduated from college, and the sport that she did really wasn't available to her anymore. And so she became a marathon runner. And she told me, she said, I hate running. I run so I can eat. It was actually what she told me. And, we did a lot of work together, because she was actually using acupuncture more to treat symptoms. She's like, I'm here so that I can keep running, so that I can keep eating whatever I want. But gradually over time, we worked together, and we started to identify other things that she could do for movement that actually lit her up more. And then it became less of a focus on I'm running so I can eat these foods, because then she also got reconnected to eating to thrive, as opposed to eating just because it was filling a void in her life. So yeah, I think those are my three big tips: is be passionate about something, and cultivate that, whether it's your art, your music, your work. Move and find movement that you enjoy doing, and stay connected to fellow humans, your community, as well as the place you live, from the perspective of nature and food.
Awesome. Yeah, that was beautifully said. And thank you so much for taking the time out. If people that are listening in that want to reach out to you or look up, your work, how can they reach you?
So definitely through my website, ronaldprattacu.com. That's ronaldpratt.acu.com. If people are also interested in the tracking form that I use with patients, they can actually get that on my website, ronaldprattacu.com/tracking form. And, I blog regularly. I am on Facebook. I do a lot of Facebook Lives. I committed to my patients I would do Facebook Live every Friday for the quarantine, as a way to stay in touch. So I do that. I'm not as active on some of the other platforms. So probably the best place is my website and Facebook.
Okay. Excellent. Well, guys, definitely check him out if you want to have things addressed from a different perspective, and needing to get a deeper understanding of where your health and overall well-being is at. So definitely, search him out. I'll definitely include that in the show notes. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing your story with us today on today's show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure as well. Guys, thank you so much for listening in. If you like this, please share, follow, and subscribe. And if you feel that this podcast brings you a value, please share it with a fellow human being. We will see you on the next one. Hey guys, that was another episode of Thrive Bites. If you like that episode, please subscribe and follow for new episodes. And don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts.